Indigenous Rights Radio, because knowledge is power.
From November 10 to 21st, 2025, the UN Climate Change Conference, commonly referred to as COP30, is taking place in Belém, Brazil. The city, called the gateway to the Amazon rainforest, this major global meeting has gathered government representatives from 198 countries, alongside UN bodies, civil society, academia, private sector, and significant delegations of indigenous peoples, women, and youth. Notably, this year has the largest ever participation of indigenous peoples in the conference series, with over 3,000 indigenous delegates registered. Cultural survival is engaging with indigenous leaders and their representatives to understand their goals for COP30.
Leosim Chokul Tesia, Leosim Chaneaba Umawayaim. Respectful greetings and thanks to all of my relatives that are following the process from near, from inside, from out on the streets, and from around the world. My name is Andrea Carmen. I'm the Executive Director of the International Indian Treaty Council, which represents 5 different regions of Indigenous peoples, and we have general consultative status at the United Nations. We're involved in a lot of different negotiations on a lot of different topics internationally, but carrying always the voice of our grassroots Indigenous peoples and what it is that their expertise is basing, the negotiations on, taking that knowledge and those lived experiences into the international arena. So that's what we're doing here. Because as we all know, the climate crisis, we don't even like to say climate change, is one of the biggest threats to the survival of Indigenous peoples, our ways of life, our food systems, our future generations, and of course, the entire planet we call Mother Earth. We as Indigenous peoples that have the opportunity to be inside the negotiations here, because there's, as we all know by now, there's a lot of Indigenous peoples, thousands, that came here to Belém, Brazil, many of whom were supported by the Brazilian government to come, but do not have credentials to get inside the negotiations. And we've had a chance to speak to some of the leaders of the marches, demonstrations, the forced entry into the what's called the blue zone here, the COP venue, the first week. But also we're sharing that we as Indigenous peoples here also, even though we're allowed to sit in the negotiations and sometimes make a statement on behalf of the Indigenous peoples constituency, the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change is called. We just call it the caucus, the Indigenous caucus. We have to really struggle to have our voices be heard here, to have our text actually defending our rights and way of life go into the negotiations. I just shared here in the caucus that we've been able to hold the paragraph that we have submitted for the negotiations on what's called the United Arab Emirates Just Transition Work Program. Hold the paragraph that recognizes the distinct, internationally recognized collective rights of Indigenous peoples, including, and we're highlighting, our right to free, prior, informed consent and to self-determination regarding programs and activities being carried out in the name of just transition, which really has not been defined yet. Of course, we have a view of what just means and what transition has to mean. If mining for lithium or cobalt, copper, etc., or the imposition of industrial wind farms, mega dams is being carried out in the name of just transition and climate change mitigation, in the same way that extractive industries have always come into our territories without our free, prior, informed consent, without respect for our land rights, then it's not transition for us. It's business as usual, more of the same. So we've been fighting to keep a paragraph which is still in the text. We're really gratified because there were a lot of states supporting the language that we have in there. Some states, I won't have time to go down the list. I think UK said they don't want collective rights in there. Others say that the rights of indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation and initial contact, very important issue here in the Amazon in Brazil that we also have in our text, that those rights have not been defined by an international standard, but we feel it's very important to keep that in the text, and it is in this morning's text. So we're excited about that. We've been working really hard, speaking in bilateral meetings with states outside the negotiations, and we do have a lot of support. I want to thank in particular Panama has been very strong in support of our text with no changes, but a few states, have proposed. Nobody yet has proposed to remove the paragraph on Indigenous peoples' rights as a standalone paragraph. We don't want to be combined in a laundry list or, Christmas tree of everybody, listed. We know how those lists go. We are in one of the paragraphs that references the preamble to the Paris Agreement, which includes rights of Indigenous peoples and many other entities, but we also are fighting hard to keep a standalone text, a paragraph recognizing the distinct collective rights of Indigenous peoples and protections for Indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation. So I just want to say that there are elements in the text that are not decided yet, talking about the issue of mining in particular, which is a big issue here in the Amazon. But for my nation, the Yaqui Nation, 2 years ago at the climate COP, Mexico and the United States announced what's called Plan Sonora, which will turn the Sonora Desert, which is our homeland, into one giant lithium mine and contaminate our river, the Yaqui River, and all the groundwater, which is very scarce anyway, fragile. We've heard from Indigenous peoples in Argentina and Bolivia, in the so-called lithium triangle, that after a few years of lithium mining there, they have no uncontaminated groundwater left. And even the mines are having to pull out because they don't have any more water. But what about the peoples that live there? We don't want to experience that. So, I have a very strong vested interest, you could say, of course, on the rights of all Indigenous peoples, but my nation's survival is at stake in this discussion on what's called just transition. As well, we know we're in solidarity with each other, whether you're here, whether you're outside, whether you're marching in the streets here in Belém, whether you're in your homeland around the world. We all have a life or death interest in these discussions, and it's very hard sometimes, being here, because we're not full negotiators. We're called observers, here's my observers, in discussions that are really life and death for our peoples. But we appreciate everybody's support. Send your thoughts and prayers. If you can talk to the country where you're at, ask them to support Indigenous people's rights in the text we're negotiating here, but probably more important, to support the implementation of our rights that are affirmed in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples on the ground, wherever we may be. That's what we need to defend, and defend a life for our future generations, which really is in question now because of the climate crisis.
For more information on the rights of Indigenous peoples, visit ces.org and follow Cultural Survival on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, and Blue Sky.